Welcome, everybody. This is going to be so much fun today. We don't do a lot of Zoom reviews of books from John Pearson's Buckets blog. Originally, if you get my newsletter, your weekly staff meeting, you know that I promised a second review of this really interesting book. And here's how I'm going to position it if you don't know anything about the book. In my review, I said, will you read one book, book number one, or will you read book number two? And so here's your option. Book number one, published just last week by Harvard Business Review. It's a master class in strategy, product and program development, marketing, customer research, incremental innovation, differentiation, blue ocean strategy, the reputation reality gap, and how to recover from a PR dumpster fire. A PR dumpster fire. I love that line. It also has 25 references to articles that have been in the Harvard Business Review. So do you think you want to read that one or book number two? Also hot off the press last week, I call this a page turner that explores the impact and influence of one person. The author calls this person a strategic genius who leverages her, you got that right, her songwriting brilliance and artistry to create a new music market niche against all odds and lots of naysayers. But you've probably heard of this 35-year-old sensation, the first musician to make the Forbes World's Billionaire list, with a quote ranking primarily based on her songs and performances. And of course, we're talking about Taylor Swift. And to join me, because I'm an old guy and I can't say that I've listened to that many Taylor Swift songs, but what I've listened to, I've loved. So Malia Yim is joining us. And Malia, you look like you are a Swifty, right? Your shirt
Yes.
and your background there.
I came prepared. I am the resident Swifty of the bunch.
Okay, so you're I know you I know your parents and your grandparents, and we've met a couple of times at parties and whatever. But your grandmother, of course, has played a song you've written, got an award for at Westmont College, right?
Oh, gosh.
I mean, how's
No
that?
awards, but
She's your,
yeah.
she's your greatest fan, and now you're in grad school in screenwriting. Is that right?
Sure is. Sure
So
is.
tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a writer-director based out of Orange County. I'm currently getting my master's in screenwriting at Chapman's Dodge Film College. Yeah, it's been great. As John mentioned, I write. I did a little bit of verse back in my heyday, but we're here writing feature and television. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining this. I don't know if you had an option of saying no because it was your grandmother who suggested you, and I owe her because it's a great suggestion. And Paul Palmer, we've done lots of crazy things together. Paul, thanks again for jumping in on this. As I recall, I had read one page of this book, and I'd gotten a review copy, and I said, "Oh, I got to get Paul involved in somehow helping me review this book." And so I did an overnight ship of the book to you because you were going on, wait for this, Malia, he was going on a Caribbean cruise. And,
Oh.
and so I got the book to him, and then he emails me from the cruise saying, "I'm just having too much fun to read the book. Can we push the Zoom review back a bit?" So, but Paul, you're a music major at ORU.
Yes,
Tuba, right?
I was a tuba major, music education.
You wanted to be a high school band teacher. Uh, Praise God for high school band teachers.
Yes.
But then one of the things that we're going to ask you about is tell us a little bit about that claim to fame. And I can't remember what year. Was it in the 70s when you were a road manager for
1974. To sort of back up just a tad on that one, I had at my senior year at Oral Roberts, I created what's called the Cultural Affairs Committee. And we had 4 different events that which they never had of Igor Kipnis on harpsichord and a speaker and an individual singer. and did that, and then went to the University of Iowa and was there as house manager of an auditorium. And I left that and went back to Tulsa to help design a performing arts center for the city of Tulsa. And that job ended, and I contacted a friend who I'd been working with, said, "Hey, do you know any jobs that are open?" Well, we have a road show of Jack Klugman and Tony Randall doing the Neil Simon play, The Odd Couple. This is spring of '74. We need a company manager for it because what happened was when they were on, you're too young for this, Malia, but back in the 70 to 75, the Neil Simon play, if you haven't read it, you ought to check it out. The movie and the TV show was on the TV show with Jack Klugman and Tony Randall were on from 70 to 75. And when they did back in those days, did 52 from 13. My math has gone on me right now. They did 39 weeks they did TV, and then 13 weeks they were on hiatus back in the day. And during those 13 weeks, they would actually take the Neil Simon play on tour and play 8 weeks, still making their $25,000 a week that they were making in TV, which was 1974. You figure those dollars in today's dollars, it is huge money back then.
Yeah.
And so they needed a company manager for Seattle, South Bend, Chicago, Norfolk, Pasadena, and Birmingham. So we crisscrossed the country for 8 weeks. And if you watch American Idol, they do their auditions and the performances at the Pasadena Civic. And that's where we performed, and we did the Chicago Theater, the big one in there in Chicago, John. I'm sure you know that one downtown. And then, so we were in the Seattle Opera House. So it was, it was great, but it was fun being a company manager at age of 24 in the summer of 1974. So,
wow. So when I said there, you could read one book or 2 books, but actually the good news, all you have to do is read one book. And the book is There's Nothing Like This, The Strategic Genius of Taylor Swift. And what I loved about it, because I review mostly books on business and leadership, is that multiple times, more than 25 times in the book, it references an article in the Harvard Business Review. And I've always loved articles in the Harvard Business Review. I did a review of one back in 2018 on how CEOs manage their time by Michael Porter and another writer. And so I just got so excited about this book. And then I learned a ton about Taylor Swift in the process. So Malia, before we started recording, you were talking about, this amazing woman who's a billionaire now, still 35. Maybe most people know her because she's dating Travis Kelce with the Super Bowl champs, Kansas City Chiefs. But you tell us how you made some money going to one of her concerts.
Oh, yeah. So with Taylor Swift, yeah, I was fortunate enough to be one of the few that got a Ticketmaster ticket. But I had a friend who also got tickets, so I ended up selling mine and making a profit, and still attending with my friend who had also gotten tickets.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was the Eras Tour in 2023?
Yes, that was the Eras Tour. Mm-hmm.
So can you describe it in less than 60 minutes?
Yeah, the Eras Tour is basically an amalgamation of all the albums that Taylor has released. It's part of her relaunch of re-recording her albums, and between COVID and taking personal hiatuses, she decided to come out and do an all-encompassing Taylor Swift concert. And she called those different albums different eras because she's a marketing legend, and
Totally.
marketed each album pretty flawlessly. Even in the midst of tough PR, she has found a way to market and get interest for each album. And so it is I think it was a 3.5-hour concert.
I remember the book saying it was a phenomenally long.
It is phenomenally long, but it doesn't feel long. You're on your feet the entire time.
Oh my.
beat is accounted for. And it was definitely, I mean, I think it's the best-selling national tour of all time. I think it's broken every record.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have diplomats reaching out to Taylor Swift to boost their economies. And you know, it was quite the journey, it seems like, for her, and it was the best experience. I still rewatch the Eras tour now streaming, just because I cannot believe I got to attend what
Yeah.
probably for my generation is like the best concert of all time. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you think she will ever do a concert at the Sphere in Las Vegas?
Ooh, I don't know. That would be an interesting one. I've never been to the Sphere, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't know, but I've heard it's exceptional. Didn't the who was there last? That
The Eagles.
Eagles
the
and
Eagles. Yeah, the Eagles were there
and
last.
And
Yeah.
you two opened it.
You too. That's who I'm remembering. I was like, wasn't
our
Bono?
daughter-in-law Melinda was invited by a friend who does some work for Bono, and got to go there. So
Very
Paul, the era, according to the book, and for those who are saying like Pearson, really, you want me to read a book about Taylor Swift? You know, I'm as old as you, or you know, I like country gospel, but you know, and I listened to a few of her early songs that were clearly country, and then it's a fabulous discussion about how she moved gradually, incremental innovation. And here's a Harvard Business Review article you should read, because if your business is trying to go from here to here, but not lose the people that are here. But the first page talks about her, I think it was the first page, where she's 13 and she comes to a songwriting session, and another songwriter asks another dad to come because he had 13-year-olds, and they start working on lyrics together. She already had brought 10, 15 songs, and the songwriter, the professional songwriter suggests, well, maybe what if you do this? And she kind of looks at him and says, well, that would be kind of trite for my demographic. And the other songwriter high fives her. I mean, I was just blown away. But Paul, one thing that absolutely blew me away, for the Eras tour, she needed 50 semi trucks for all the stuff, the platform stuff. How many semi trucks did you have when you were the company manager for the Odd Couple?
There was one Penske rented box truck for the sets.
One.
Because it was a play, which is different than if you had a musical. Now, I did some research before I got on today, and the original Les Miserables tour in 1988 or 1990 they had 15 semis, but that was back in the original days of Les Mis, where they had the 10,000-pound turntable that moved. If you saw the original of Les Mis, the stage turned.
Huh.
And the barricades were down, and then they were up, and then they turned, and that weighed 10,000 pounds or 12,000 pounds for the barricades. So it was a huge thing. Now, Phantom of the Opera, when it tours, is 20 semis, but they're running 85 to 100 people, just like the Swift concerts. I mean, they have hundreds of people, but we had 2 stage managers that traveled with us, and they alternated cities. So they use basically local IATSE, union guys who were theater guys that come in and do the load in and set the stage, and the lights are on or off. Basically, there's no fancy lighting, no spots, no nothing. Just the stage lights are on, and intermission comes, the curtain comes down, and when it's over, the curtain comes down again. So it's
wow.
Malia, different world.
Yeah, exactly. Malia, do you have any friends by chance that send you must read this book? It's about a Broadway play. Has anyone ever?
You know what's interesting is that I do have a theater minor. So
do you?
I also find this incredibly interesting. Yeah. I mean, I've done a few productions myself, but I have a lot of friends who are in that world and space, and it's area that that's also an interest. So this is really interesting. Absolutely.
Well, maybe this won't be the first of many Zoom calls in, because I'll send you all the books that Paul has sent me that I haven't read yet, like Andrew Lloyd Webber and whatever.
Yeah.
But and I've told Paul I still have them. I mean, I think my last count, which my wife Joanne asked me to keep track of, how many books are coming in versus how many books are you giving away or taking to Goodwill or in San Clemente Beachtown Books.
Yeah, it's a good place.
But you know, the innovation of Taylor Swift, I absolutely love this from the book. She was named the 2023 iHeartRadio Music Awards. She got the Innovator Award. Now here's this young singer, songwriter, and she got up to accept the award, and she says, I never a single time woke up in the morning and thought, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to innovate some stuff. So, Malia, it seems to me like, and the author admits, I don't know that she's ever read a Harvard Business Review article on this or that or this, but it's almost is intuitive. She must have good people around her, but how, you know, talk to me about like one or two of her songs that kind of grab you, because she seems to have a otherworldly sense of understanding her customer, of her fan.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and I mentioned it to my friend when we were at her concert, is that she's grown up with her fans. So as you're mentioning, she's in a writing session at 13 and her audience is 13-year-olds. And as she's growing up, her audience, she's writing music that she likes. So in some ways, she's writing the things that, you know, she thinks we want to hear. But at the end of the day, she's writing what she wants to hear. And I think that's a lot of the advice that a lot of writers get in general is, especially in entertainment, when it comes to film or music, write what you want. Write the film that you want to see. Write the music that you want to listen to. And I think that's been a particular thing that she's just really done, as you mentioned. You know, her music has elevated, you know, she drops a couple curse words now. She's an adult whose maybe heart has been bittered, been used and abused. So, you know, but you know, 13-year-old, 14-year-old Taylor is like, oh my gosh, like this is all great. So you're kind of growing up with her. So it is fun. And I think the reason, or one of the many reasons of why the Swifty land is as strong as it is because it's hit all of these markers. We can go back and we can be nostalgic. It puts us in touch with our younger childlike self. But then, you know, when we go through that bad breakup, or, you know, when we're being misunderstood by a company or an organization, you know what I mean? You can go to Reputation album and you can scream being misunderstood, you know, just a couple more adult themes that now as an adult, you're like, oh, I know why she said this. This is, you know, putting words to things that we would only hope and, you know, maybe feeling, but, you know, she's identifying more poignantly as a writer.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning, because when I mentioned in my review, just kind of down at the bottom, you might find a few, shall we say, non-church words in the book. It's not very, very minor ones from Taylor Swift, but when the author did huge research, and when he would quote other people, they would, maybe that's part of the music performance industry. But Paul, I picked out just kind of 5 themes out of the book. I'm always looking for the business leadership idea. As you know, I was privileged to work with nonprofit, mostly Christian organizations for years and years, and then consulted with them. And so I'm always thinking, okay, so if they read this book, what would be a life lesson for this organization? And I thought, very much tied into what you just said, Malia, one of the key points was it appeared that Taylor Swift looked for what business would call blind spots. it said Swift was banking on the ideas that Nashville had a blind spot, young women who write their own songs for young women. And she couldn't get any, the big record company. So she connected with a new record company and waited till that company had formed 6 months later. And they had a pretty good start, not always agreeing or disagreeing, but Paul, the blind spot thing is pretty interesting, and maybe both of you would comment. But Paul, first, the fact that she couldn't get agreement on the ownership of her albums, and I know that that's an intellectual property thing, but then she re-released all these albums and called them XYZ Taylor's version. I mean, have you seen that anywhere else, Paul?
It's the negotiating process on intellectual property, and I'm not an intellectual property specialist, but in reading, you mentioned Andrew Lloyd Webber earlier.
Yeah.
And Malia, if you want to read a great book, read his autobiography, because it is absolutely phenomenal. But he talks about, after he wrote, I believe, Jesus Christ Superstar, which was the first thing they did, he and Andrew and Tim Rice, and a publisher came to him who was his good friend, said, I want to sign the publishing deal. And he talked to another friend and said, whatever you do, do not give up mechanical rights. And this was like 1970, 71. And no one knew what mechanical rights were. So he said, okay, fine, I won't give up. So he goes to the publisher and says, okay, everything's fine. He said, I want to keep mechanical rights. And the publisher said, okay, whatever you want, that's fine. But if he had given up mechanical rights, he would not have been able to do movies, any other ways that the musical could be performed. And by keeping, he said, the most valuable lesson he ever learned was not giving up mechanical rights. And I think that the parallel here to Swift is that she didn't give up her ownership rights of the music. She gave up the ownership rights of the masters, which are two different. She kept the underlying copyright, but they had the right to release the product. So that's so it's just sort of stuck in my mind. That's one of the first things I told John when I read the book, was the whole idea of mechanical rights, such a simple two little words, but change the trajectory of musical theater in the last 55 years, which is,
So Malia, in your screenwriting graduate work, do you have to be an attorney to be a successful screenwriter? I mean, I worked, with a large church in the Chicago area that was publishing stuff out of the parking lot, and we formed what was called a publishing review committee, and we talked about intellectual property. And I had to go from class 101 to 401 very fast. Fortunately, there was an attorney who was a good friend who helped us get there. But is that a big deal in screenwriting?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because intellectual property works differently with screenwriting, because ideally you're working within the union, so WGA and East WGA and stuff like that. So it's interesting. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm learning on this as I kind of go along. Lawyers are your friends. With screenwriting, you don't. So once if someone's hiring you to write a script, or once you sold the script, you don't own the intellectual property. Whereas if you write a book and you sell a book to the publisher, you own that intellectual property. So screenwriting works very differently. A lot of the times you might find a screenwriter who might, publish an article first about the topic, write the screenplay, and then they can still own the intellectual property. There's a lot of other ways around it, but because of a deal back in the 60s, the Writers Guild, this is the way of operation it's been. I think it's the best way of operation for screenwriters? Definitely not. But this is the deal, is that you technically don't own your own property once you. So it's a whole other ball game. So it's less managing. There's still contracts to be managed, but you can still own that intellectual property if you're selling, your book, or if you have, a recording of a podcast or etc. All of that.
Wow. So when I got to go down a little side path. When are you going to be joining the picket lines picketing against AI, or do your profs talk about that?
Yeah, AI is interesting. I think AI is a concern, but not as large of a concern as like some other. There's a lot of things changing in the industry. Right now I'm in grad school, so what's nice is that these are not issues that I need to deal with. I'm hoping that my, you know, people ahead of me are taking care of it,
Yeah,
but it's
sure.
looking like, but this is also a very common thing. There's been a
Yeah,
couple strikes that's, there's constantly changes. It's like
yeah,
any industry, there's always innovation and there's always new variables. So, but I would say AI is not, I haven't read a script that has been good from AI. You typically can tell, so it's not developed
yeah,
yet.
sure.
You know, AI being used as a tool for research or, X, Y, and Z can be helpful, but at the end of the day, stories are told by people and the good ones are told by people. So it's kind of hard to
Yeah,
imitate that. But, still, it's the hot topic. It's the easy, it's the one that comes across your ticker on your, on
yeah,
your news cycle because it's such a hot topic. But there's definitely
yeah,
other issues like streaming and residues and all the back end right now because as a writer you used to have your like if you were a writer on Friends and then every episode you would get an extra some bonus on the back end, but you don't really have that streaming anymore, and
yeah,
writers rooms are just getting smaller and smaller because
yeah,
more limited series are popular. You're
yeah.
having 12 episodes instead of 22. So there's some exceptions in the industry right now, and I hope that shows some cool things. There should be space for all of it, but yeah,
Okay.
those are the more things that I think
Yeah,
as writers were like employment and
A
uh
little,
and
yeah.
residue. That's where we're at.
The whole issue of residuals, and things like that. When they were doing the Odd Couple TV show, Tony Randall negotiated, I think, a 15% ownership in the show from Paramount.
Oh wow.
And
It's
but
just not heard of these days.
and then he had Jack Klugman, I think, negotiated himself a small percentage of the show because that back then, okay, it was on TV. It was in the top 25 on Nielsen every year. It was on for 5 years, and it was never on the same night any season. ABC kept moving it around, but it was still in the top 25 back then. And what's interesting is that people thought, oh well, it Friends changed the whole thing about $1 million per episode and you get money forever, ever, ever. But Tony Randall, when he had the ownership, because Odd Couple is going to go away, Odd Couple's still on somewhere on TV
yeah,
Land or something
Right.
like that, and it has been since 1975. But basically, it's never gone off the air somewhere somehow. So Tony Randall's widow is probably still receiving nice
Still
royalty checks
receiving their
from
residuals. That's
and on this whole copyright issue, which is another friend of mine worked for Mana Music, which owns a copyright to How Great Thou Art.
Mhm.
The Blood Will Never Lose Its Power, Andre Crouch. They did some of the early Andre Crouch music. And they told me back in 1975, once again, what I said, what's How Great Thou Art? What are the royalty stream on that? And my friend said, well, this was 1975. She said, we got the quarterly check from Reader's Digest because they put out the hymns LP
Oh yeah,
back
right.
then, compilation of hymns.
Yeah.
A quarterly check in 1970 was $250,000 from Reader's Digest for that's one bender for How Great Thou Art. So
wow,
I
You think
can't
of
even
how many,
imagine, what and
yeah.
that's why, Andrew Lloyd Webber, Cameron McIntosh for Les Mis and things like this, they find things in the public domain that they don't need to worry about, like Phantom of the Opera. LaRue's uh, book came out in 1906, or 1905, so it was public domain. Les Miserables was written in 1850, so there's no copyright issues there whatsoever. So that one of the things that Alan Boublil, one of the writers of Les Mis, said at the 40th or the 25th anniversary of the show, said, "We love public domain."
well, man, we could. I think we could do a 3-hour Zoom podcast, but I'm not Joe Rogan. I don't think I could make it that long. But I remember, and this is absolutely fascinating. One of the points in the book that jumped out at me was differentiation, and how Taylor Swift had differentiated herself so specifically. And they pointed to Harvard Business Review articles. It reminded me of a book that I did with Bob Hisrick in 1990, Marketing Your Ministry, 10 Critical Principles. And I'd heard him give his presentation probably 10 times, a day-long presentation on marketing for Christian camps. And I remember one of his key points was don't be the 8th lemonade stand in a row of 9. And so as I read through this book, I was just saying, boy, there were just some really savvy insights in this book. They're not all necessarily new, but a lot of people just don't take them and use them. But the references to the Harvard Business Review and others, including Paul, you'd be familiar with Seth Godin, his book, This is Marketing. And man, 10 plus years ago, I reviewed this book that is so unique. It didn't even have the title on the cover or his name. It's just the side, Poke the Box by Seth Godin. And looking at it again this morning, Malia, page 29, he talks about the economics of poking and basically just get out there and start doing it. He says, when you're writing a screenplay, on the other hand, the cost of an innovation is far less than the cost of being boring. Because boring, though it occasionally randomly, miraculously leads to a sale, almost always fails instead. The cost of being wrong is less than the cost of doing nothing. So we would just ask, Malia, that the screenwriting that you do not be boring, okay? and
okay, that's a tall ask. I don't know.
And differentiate. Another key principle that I pulled out was premature core abandonment. After first album, one person wrote, the record shows that if management cannot turn a company around within a few years, the odds are that it will never again see healthy top line growth. And Malia, I wanted to ask you this thing because I'd never heard this term before, but maybe Paul, you've heard it too. But when you go to your second album, the second book by an author, maybe the second screenplay, the phenomenon, the path from first to second album is full of dangers. The phenomenon, researched for decades and feared even longer, goes by different names. Second album syndrome, the sophomore slump, or simply the slump. And if you do Wikipedia for the sophomore slump, apparently there's a lot of sophomores that just their grades are worse in the second year, etc. But Taylor Swift avoided that. Amazingly. And she had some PR troubles kind of halfway through the book, talking about her various albums. Some of the other celebrities were jealous, but she handled it amazingly well. I mean, kind of a master class on how you handle a PR dumpster fire, as the book called it. So, Malia, before we wrap up, do you have one or two Taylor Swift songs that are special to you for any reason that you'd care to divulge?
Oh, that are special to me.
Or that you dislike?
I don't know. I think I mentioned this before. It's cool because they come into seasons of your life. So
yeah.
Like, the first song I ever listened to was on the radio and my aunt was playing it. It was Love Story. It was from the Fearless album. And that was, My go-to karaoke song is Our Song from Taylor Swift's like first album because everyone knows it. It's so nostalgic.
Okay.
You know, all of that. But then, you know, there's heavier hitters. Her folklore album came during COVID, where it was like a very isolating period,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
for me, it was a very big comfort album, where I could, and it talked about themes that you could relate to, but it was nice because it almost felt like another layer to her story where she's no longer just, you know, self-narrating what's going on in her life, but in that album you had characters and you had, you know, three songs that were about the same three storyline, but from a different perspective of character.
Okay.
And for me, that was what was really fun during a potentially like dark period of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I remember when Reputation came out, that album, I was in high school and I just didn't get it. I was, you know, I was still in my fearless era. I was still like, boys are so great, and oh my goodness, like this is so lovely. Romeo and Juliet, let's get this show on the road. And then, you know, I hit my adult years and I was like screaming, I'm trying to think of one that comes to mind. Getaway Car. I was,
Okay.
you're out here of Don't Blame Me. Like you're starting, you're starting to have some stronger emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's nice that they hit every mark,
Yeah.
and those are the ones that for me it's cool. There's the whole idea of the era is that we're multifaceted human beings, and so and for Taylor, she's also multifaceted human being and artist
Yeah. Yeah.
who has felt a lot of things like all of us and have, there's the whole range of the feelings wheel. So there's really not and she's such a strong lyricist. And
Yes.
she's a great
Yes.
collaborator. She's a great artist, a great musician, but she knows who is going to get the best out of her, which is really, especially when you're talking about leadership, it's important to have those
Yeah.
people around you. And
Yeah.
I think if you look at her life in terms of the people that she's kept in it, or her consistent collaborators, or, the people that she keeps on her production team, or, even her PR management team is one of the best in the biz, and they could be case studies done on them. Like
Incredible.
but she has
Yeah.
good people around her, and I think
Yeah.
that's what really helps her leadership style.
Wow. That was
It's-
I think that
Maybe
PR
she should write a
team,
book, John. I think
that
she should write
PR
a book.
team is gonna take a
I
snap of this podcast and
I was the prime demographic when she came on the scene. She was writing to me.
yeah.
And she
Yeah.
continues to still write, you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
it reminds me of, when I get hearing from grandparents of the Beatlemania and,
Yeah. Yeah.
those
Yeah.
who were the teens right then and there. That was me. That's still me.
I remember in 8th grade sitting in civics class, and it was 1962. And the civics teacher said, Mr. Childers, I'll never forget it, said, "You know what's happening today, don't you?" And at Lee Summit, Missouri, he said, "The Beatles have arrived."
Mm.
I went, oh, so and that was, how many years ago was that, John? 53 years ago?
Too many. Too
No,
many.
63 years ago. 63
Yeah.
years ago. So that's,
Wow.
it's generational. And being a Broadway nerd as opposed to a Swifty nerd.
Still a Broadway nerd too. We
Yeah,
have
yes.
multifaceted people.
I look at
lots of
it's very interesting. There's eras in Broadway.
yeah.
And there's a great show called Broadway Musicals: A Jewish Legacy.
Oh, okay.
And it talks about how, if you look at the writers on Broadway, for the most part, probably 90% of them are Jewish. And they're telling but what they do is they've done what Taylor did in some respects. They're speaking to them, to their tribe, if you will, but they're putting it in different terms. Hairspray is a good example. Hairspray was talking about the racial issue. but it was really talking about anti-Semitism. They were able, if they had come out with some musical about anti-Semitism or the way the Jews have been mistreated, it would not have gone anywhere. But because it came out as being, it was taking place in 1962, the race issues in Baltimore during that time, and if you look at all the shows that they've written there where they're looking at race or some other issue, King and I is the same thing. They were talking about race with the Asians, but it was also a Jewish situation. So it really is interesting how the writers, whether it be Taylor Swift or Rodgers and Hammerstein or Alan, forget his name now, from Hairspray, how they're writing towards their own situation, but telling it in a different context.
Okay.
And that's what's interesting. And what you said about Taylor writing to you, that's the same thing. It's sort of like in the show Spam-A-Lot, the Monty Python show, which is coming back to LA and Orange County, John, next year. Just so you know, we'll have to plan that one. Okay.
Okay.
He talks, one of the songs is, you can't be a success on Broadway if you don't have any Jews. That was one of the songs.
Oh my. Wow.
And it's just,
Well,
you know, and because it was on Broadway, it was such an inside joke that everybody loved it. Same with Taylor. So it's
wow. Well, listen, you guys, this has been so much fun for the people who are listening who say, John, so tell me, what are those Harvard Business Review articles? So when I post this video, I will list the how to link to that. And for those who are not Harvard Business Review fans, you can go onto the website and get a free, you can just register. It doesn't cost anything to register. And I think you can read 3 articles a month. They'll give you a free, or there's a monthly subscription. But the book mentions, as in the context of Taylor Swift's savviness, the Harvard Business Review article on Blue Ocean Strategy, another one, The Great Repeatable Business Model, another one, When Growth Stalls. Everybody's worried about when you get to the top of the S curve, how do you reinvent yourself to keep going? She did it. Really interesting one, Why Target's Canadian Expansion Failed. In 2013, they went into Canada. They bought 133 stores that had been vacated. And after 2 years, the board of directors pulled the plug, and that was $5.4 billion later. They left Canada. Target, imagine. And it kind of compares new innovations, and somehow Taylor Swift could innovate and succeed. I love the Harvard Business Review article by Clayton Christensen, who has since passed away, called Your Customer's Job to Be Done. I once wrote a little blurb or blog on what he called, what's the job of a milkshake? And he compares that. So 3 leadership skills that count, leading change, why transformation efforts fail. And just recently, last December, the author of the book, Kevin Evers, wrote Taylor Swift and the Strategic Genius of the Eras Tour. That's a Harvard Business Review article. And then the current issue, March-April issue of Harvard Business Review, has an article, The Strategic Genius of Taylor Swift. So for those of you who are saying, okay, I'm not a Taylor Swift fan, although maybe Malia has convinced me I should be, there's some deep learning that can happen. So Paul, any last word of 10 seconds or less?
Read the book. It really, I read parts of it. Like you said, I was on the cruise, and I was having too much fun to read. But the IP issues are phenomenal. That I just think are really fascinating to me.
Okay.
And I remember reading about it as it happened, that there was this huge battle going on, and it was just, you know, it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, Malia, any last minute words?
I think you've convinced me. I should be reading this book.
Okay, watch for my email. I'll give you 3 options. Okay.
Okay.
So for those who enjoyed this podcast, you can't have enjoyed it as much as I have. This was so much fun. you can go to my website, managementbuckets.com, and over at the top, if you look for the blogs, you can click on this one called John Pearson's Buckets Blogs. I have another one called Pails in Comparison, Pails like buckets, pails in comparison, and there'll be reviews on both of those. And if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, your weekly staff meeting, which has a book review in each issue, you can do that at managementbuckets.com. So Malia and Paul, thank you. This was so much fun. I think I owe you both, and Malia, I owe your grandmother for suggesting you. Great choice. Thanks for joining us, and everybody read the book.